Welcome back to the deep dive. I hope you're ready for this one, because today we are tackling something that it feels like the ground is shifting beneath our feet.
Hmm.
We grow up with this very specific idea of what science and academia are supposed to be, right? We think of them as these, unshakable pillars.
Right. The pursuit of objective truth.
Exactly. You have the scientific method, you have peer review, this relentless, unemotional search for facts.
It's the bedrock of modern civilization,
Yes.
or at least, we like to believe it is. The whole idea is that facts are facts, evidence is evidence, and it doesn't matter who you are, what you look like, or what your politics are.
Right.
If the data says X, then X is the truth.
It's supposed to be the one place where narrative goes to die. But the stack of sources we're diving into today, it paints a very different and honestly a pretty unsettling picture.
It really does.
We're looking at a massive collection of materials. We've got interviews with social psychologist Jonathan Haidt, the theoretical physicist Lawrence Krauss, economist Roland Fryer, meta-researcher Ioannidis, and a whole host of others. And if there is a common thread here, it's that the bedrock is cracking.
It is cracking. And what's fascinating, and maybe a little terrifying, is why it's cracking. It's not because we've, forgotten how to do math. It's not because we lack funding.
No.
It's cracking because of a fundamental shift in values. We are seeing a high-stakes conflict between the pursuit of truth and the demands of ideology.
And specifically,
Specifically, we're seeing how a culture of safetyism and victimhood is beginning to override the basic tenets of open inquiry.
and just to be clear for everyone listening, this isn't just about cancel culture on Twitter or, some kids yelling at a speaker on a college campus.
Not at all.
We're talking about medical research, we're talking about physics, we're talking about how we raise our children, and
Yeah.
ultimately how we understand reality itself.
Precisely. The mission for this deep dive is to unpack exactly how this happened. We need to look at the mechanism of what some call ideological capture. We need to understand the psychology behind this new victimhood culture that Jonathan Haidt talks about so much.
Right.
And then, most importantly, we have to look at the tangible costs. Because as we'll see, when you prioritize a narrative over the truth, real people get hurt.
So let's jump right in. I want to start with the concept of scientific integrity itself.
Yeah.
Because I think for a lot of us, we hear studies show or science says, and we nod along.
It's an appeal to authority.
Exactly. But one of our key sources, Ioannidis, sort of blows that blind faith right out of the water, and that's before we even get to the politics.
Well, Ioannidis is a titan in the field of meta-research.
Yeah.
Essentially, he does research on research. He audits the auditors.
Wow.
And he starts us off with a very sobering definition of bias. He says bias is simply any deviation from the truth beyond chance.
Which sounds simple, but the scale of it is what's scary. He's the guy who wrote that famous paper, Why Most Published Research Findings Are False.
That's the one. And he discusses how the incentive structure in academia is currently set up to produce that exact falsehood. You have this publish or perish culture. If you are a scientist, you need to publish significant results to get tenure, to get grants, to keep your job.
Yeah.
You have to show that you found something new and exciting.
And significant usually means you found a connection. If you do a study on a new drug and find nothing happened or it works the same as the old one, well, nobody wants to print that.
Exactly. Null results are boring. They don't get you into nature or science. And this leads to what Ioannidis and others call path hacking or cherry picking.
Okay, let's unpack path hacking, because I feel like that's a term we hear but don't always fully get. How does that actually work in practice?
Well, imagine you have a massive data set. Let's say you're trying to prove that eating jelly beans causes acne.
Okay, classic example.
Right. So you check the data for purple jelly beans, no link. You check for red ones, no link. You check green, blue, yellow, nothing, nothing, nothing. But then, purely by random chance, the data for orange jelly beans shows a slight correlation with acne.
Just a statistical fluke.
A total fluke.
Yeah.
But if you are p-hacking, you ignore all the other colors, you just throw that data away.
Yeah.
And you write a paper titled, New Study Links, Orange Jelly Beans to Acne.
Wow.
And because the math looks right for that one slice of the data, it gets published.
So it's like flipping a coin 1,000 times, ignoring all the times it came up tails, and then writing a paper saying, look, I've discovered a coin that only lands on heads.
That is the perfect analogy. And Ioannidis points out that the system allows a careless cohort of researchers to overtake the diligent ones.
How so?
Well, think about it. If you are a rigorous scientist who checks everything and admits when you found nothing, you publish less. You look less productive.
Right, you fall behind.
But if you cut corners and chase those flashy headlines, you publish more. You get the grants. You become the dean. You train the next generation of scientists.
So the system itself is selecting for bad science. It's rewarding the people who are willing to, bend the truth.
To an extent, yes. But that's just the structural problem. That's the baseline noise, you could say. The sources we're looking at suggest there's a newer, more ideological layer on top of this that is making things much, much worse.
Okay.
And this is where we get into the work of Corey Clark.
Right, this was fascinating. Corey Clark is a psychologist who looked at the gender gap in academia, but not the one we usually talk about.
No.
She wasn't looking at wages or positions, she was looking at priorities, at value.
Correct. And we have to be precise here with what her data suggests. It suggests a significant difference in how male and female academics, on average, view the purpose of scholarship.
And what's the difference?
The research indicates that women in academia are statistically more likely to prioritize protecting vulnerable groups from harmful findings over the abstract pursuit of truth.
Harmful findings. Let's pause on that phrase for a second. That means if a piece of data is true, factually accurate, rigorous, undeniable, but it might make a certain group feel bad or look bad or maybe reinforce a stereotype, the priority is to bury it.
That is the implication. It's a conflict between what you could call protective values and truth-seeking values.
A pretty fundamental
A
concept.
very fundamental one. And Clark's research, which was cited by the legal scholar Amy Wax in our sources, suggests that as the demographics of the university system have shifted, the culture has shifted with it. We're moving away from the abstract pursuit of truth, let the chips fall where they may, toward a model where research is curated based on its potential social consequences.
It's almost like a form of benevolent censorship. We can't let people know this because they might handle it wrong or they might draw the wrong conclusions.
Exactly. It's a paternalistic view. And look, this isn't hypothetical. We have a concrete, just heartbreaking example of this in our notes, the story of Roland Fryer.
This story, it blew my mind. It really anchors this whole discussion in a very stark reality.
It's the definitive case study for this phenomenon.
Yeah.
So Roland Fryer is a brilliant economist at Harvard. He's the youngest African-American ever to get tenure there. He won a MacArthur Genius Grant.
So he's the real deal.
He is absolutely the real deal. And he's not some conservative provocateur. He grew up rough. He had family in the criminal justice system. He cares deeply about racial inequality.
And he decided to use his incredible skills to study police use of force.
Right. And going in, he has his own expectations. He's been very open about this. He admitted that he expected to find massive racial bias in police shootings. He wanted to document it. He wanted to prove the narrative was true so that we could fix it.
He was trying to help.
100%. So he gathered an enormous amount of data, thousands and thousands of observations from multiple cities.
And what did he find?
Well, the results were nuanced. He found that for non-lethal force, being pushed, shoved, thrown to the ground, tased, there was indeed a significant racial bias.
Okay.
Black citizens were treated more roughly than white citizens in similar encounters.
So that part of it tracks with the common narrative.
Yes. But when he looked at lethal force officer-involved shootings, he found no racial bias.
None.
None. In fact, in some of the data sets he analyzed, police were slightly less likely to shoot black suspects than white suspects under similar circumstances.
Okay, so here is a guy who set out to prove one thing. And the data, his own data, told him something else. In a truth-seeking culture, that's a victory for science.
It should be.
You learn something new. You celebrate the good news that, at least in this one specific terrible area, there wasn't the bias you feared. That's a good thing.
That is exactly how it should work.
Yeah.
Science is about being surprised by the data. But that is not what happened. Fryer says that when he published this paper, all hell broke loose.
What happened?
He says he needed a bodyguard. He was attacked by his colleagues. He was socially ostracized. He was investigated by his university on what he claims were trumped-up charges. His life was turned upside down.
And the most chilling part is what he says people told him privately.
Yeah, the coffee shop moments, he calls them.
Right. He mentions colleagues meeting him for coffee, looking over their shoulder and whispering, "I can't say this in public, but I think you're right."
Or, "I like your paper, but I can't cite it because it's too radioactive."
I can't say this in public. These are tenured professors at Harvard. These are the people with the most job security in the entire world. And they are terrified to speak a fact because it contradicts the political narrative.
That is the sound of what's called the spiral of silence, which we can get into later.
Mm.
But what happened to Fryer illustrates this concept of narrative violation.
Right.
His data violated the prevailing narrative that the police are systemically hunting black men. And because the data didn't fit the story, the data and the men who found it had to be punished.
It's tragic.
And Fryer makes this point so powerfully. He says, if we delete the good news, if we only talk about the problems and delete the evidence of progress, we're gaslighting ourselves. You can't solve problems if we don't know what the reality is. If we focus all our energy on shootings, because that fits the story, but the real bias is in rough handling. We are fighting the wrong battle. Ideology blinds us to the actual solutions.
Which is just so counterproductive. And this leads us directly into our second section. Because if a genius economist at Harvard can be intimidated for publishing data, how deep does this rot go? How do these ideological narratives actually capture entire institutions?
This brings us to the Sokal Squared hoax, or as it's also known, the grievance studies affair.
I love this story. It's so audacious.
It plays out like a comedy sketch, but it's real life, and it exposes the mechanism of capture just perfectly.
So set it up for us. Who is behind this?
This was a project by 3 authors, Helen Pleckrose, James Lindsay, and Peter Boghossian. And they had a suspicion. They suspected that certain fields in the humanities, specifically what they called grievance studies, like gender studies, fat studies, critical race theory, had become completely unmoored from reality.
Okay.
They believed that these fields weren't really doing science or scholarship anymore. They were just doing ideology.
They suspected that as long as you validated the moral biases of the journal editors, you could publish absolute nonsense.
Exactly. So they decided to test it. They wrote 20 completely absurd papers over the course of a year. I mean, just bonkers stuff.
Like what? Give me an example.
They wrote one that argued dog parks were breeding grounds for rape culture and that we should train men like we train dogs to prevent sexual violence.
No way. Canine rape culture. You're kidding me.
I'm not. And they wrote another one that was actually just a chapter of Mein Kampf, Adolf Hitler's manifesto, but they rewrote it using feminist buzzwords.
They did what?
They just replaced words. They replaced Jews with men and Aryans with feminists and submitted it to a gender studies journal.
And what happened?
Not only were several of their fake papers accepted for publication in peer-reviewed journals, they were praised. The dog park paper was honored as excellent scholarship by the journal Gender, Place, and Culture.
This is unbelievable. So what does this prove? I mean, aside from the fact that those editors were clearly asleep at the wheel.
It proves that in these specific fields, ideology has replaced evidence. The expert analysis in our sources points out that the peer review process in these cases didn't check for logic or data or coherence.
Well, what did it check for?
It checked for moral conformity. Did the paper say men are bad? Did it say Western culture is oppressive? If the answer was yes, the paper got a green light, even if the content was literal gibberish or, Hitler.
It's like a password. You say the right buzzwords, patriarchy, hegemony, intersectionality, and the gate just opens.
Precisely. And this isn't just happening in obscure journals. This mindset has moved into the very administration of the universities themselves. And this is where we need to look at the insights from Amy Wax and her description of the heckler's veto.
Amy Wax is a law professor at Penn, and she has been in the crosshairs for a long, long time. She talks about how the university has shifted from a place of open inquiry to a safe space.
She describes a feminization of the institution. And she's using that term not to attack women, but to describe a shift from a combat model of ideas.
The Socratic method.
The Socratic method, exactly, where we challenge each other ruthlessly to find truth, to a nurture model, where the primary goal is emotional comfort.
The warm bath, she calls it.
Yes, the desire for an environment that never challenges one's core beliefs. And to maintain that warm bath, you have to shut down anyone who lowers the temperature. That's the heckler's veto.
Right. So if a student claims they are harmed or traumatized by an idea, say a debate about immigration or affirmative action, the administration steps in to silence the speaker.
The accusation of harm is enough. You're not just saying, I disagree with you. You're saying, your words are violence, and therefore you must be stopped.
It's weaponizing the language of safety.
And the administration, specifically the massive growth of what Amy Wax calls the diversity bureaucracy, is there to enforce that. We have bias response teams where students can anonymously report professors for microaggressions.
Which brings us to Lawrence Krauss. He's a theoretical physicist, a hard science guy. He's not talking about grievance studies. And he compares this atmosphere to something very, very dark.
He compares it to the Stasi in East Germany or the atmosphere in the Soviet Union.
That's a heavy comparison.
It is, but he gives concrete examples. He talks about receiving emails from colleagues who agree with him about the importance of objective science, but they write from their personal email addresses, not their university accounts.
Wow.
They use pseudonyms. They are terrified that if they're caught agreeing with a dissident like him, they will lose their funding, they'll lose their labs, their careers will be over.
That is terrifying. When you have physicist people who study the fundamental laws of the universe afraid to sign their name to an email because of political backlash, we have left the realm of polite disagreement and entered something, well, something totalitarian.
Krauss argues that science cannot function in that environment. Science requires the ability to be wrong, to offend, to challenge the consensus. If you create a culture where heresy is punished, you stop doing science and you start doing theology.
So we've got the corruption of some journals, we have the capture of the administration, and this pervasive fear among the faculty. But where is this all coming from? What is the psychological engine that's driving this whole train?
And that takes us to section 3. Jonathan Haidt provides the best framework here. He argues we are seeing a fundamental shift in our moral culture, a shift from a dignity culture to a victimhood culture.
Okay, let's unpack that. What was dignity culture? What does that mean?
Well, to understand dignity, you have to compare it to what came before it. For most of human history, we had honor cultures, think Game of Thrones or the Wild West.
Right. Reputation is everything.
Everything. If you insult me or my family or my clan, I have to fight you. I have to respond, often violently, to protect my honor. It's very unstable.
Okay. So then came dignity culture.
Dignity culture was the dominant mode in the West for most of the 20th century. It's based on the idea that your worth is internal. It's inherent. Everyone has dignity.
Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me.
That is the mantra of dignity culture.
Exactly.
You have an internal locus of control. If someone insults you, you brush it off. It says more about them than it does about you.
You don't run to the teacher every time someone calls you a name on the playground.
Precisely. You resolve conflicts yourself, or you just ignore them because you have better things to do. But victimhood culture is different. It's a completely different logic.
Oh, so?
In this new culture, status, your moral worth, is derived from being a victim. It's a perverse incentive system. The more oppressed you are, or the more you can claim to be oppressed, the more social capital you have.
So instead of hiding your weaknesses or your grievances, you broadcast them. You put them in your Twitter bio.
You perform them. Haidt notes that this culture is characterized by status seeking through the display of grievance. And crucial to this is the dependence on third parties.
What do you mean?
You don't solve the conflict with the person who offended you. You appeal to an authority figure, an administrator, a bias response team, a Twitter mob to swoop in and punish them for you.
This connects to that concept from the source material, the drama triangle.
Yes, the Cartman drama triangle. It's a model of dysfunctional social interaction that's been around for decades in psychology. You have 3 roles: the persecutor, the victim, and the rescuer.
And everyone needs the other roles to exist, right? It's a self-sustaining system.
Exactly.
Mm.
The rescuer, often the activist or the administrator, needs a victim to save. That's their purpose. And to have a victim, you need a persecutor. So you have to find persecutors everywhere.
So you have to interpret every slight, every disagreement, every uncomfortable statistic as an act of persecution.
You have to. The system demands it. The source material made a fascinating connection here to the Cold War.
You did, yeah.
The authors of that piece realized that during the Cold War, both the U.S. and the USSR were playing the drama triangle on a geopolitical scale.
How?
Each side saw themselves as the noble rescuer. They saw the developing world, the third world, as the helpless victim, and of course they saw the other superpower as the evil persecutor. It's a trap that simplifies the world into good versus evil and prevents any real understanding or nuance.
And when you teach this mindset to kids, when you raise a whole generation inside this triangle...
Well, then you teach them what psychologists call cognitive distortions. Haidt and his co-author Greg Lukianoff wrote the book The Coddling of the American Mind all about this. They argue we are literally teaching young people to think in ways that are clinically associated with depression and anxiety.
Things like emotional reasoning.
Yes, that's a big one. I feel it, therefore it is true. If I feel offended, you must have attacked me. Your intent doesn't matter. Only my feeling matters. If I feel unsafe in this classroom, then you, the professor, are dangerous.
And catastrophizing.
Right. Taking a small problem, someone wearing a silly sombrero on Halloween, or a speaker you dislike coming to campus, and blowing it up into an existential threat. This puts my life in danger. We are seeing the language of physical violence being applied to mere words and ideas.
Which is a huge shift. And Haidt links all of this to the Great Rewiring, right? The technology aspect of it.
He does. And this is crucial context. This isn't just kids these days are soft. Haidt argues, with a ton of data, that Gen Z, what he calls the anxious generation, had a fundamentally different childhood. They moved from a play-based childhood to a phone-based childhood.
We stopped letting kids go outside and play unsupervised.
We did. We overprotected them in the real world, that's the safetyism part, but then we gave them smartphones and let them into the brutal, unprotected world of social media with no supervision at all.
And the lack of unsupervised play is key.
It's everything. When kids play alone, they have to resolve conflicts. If you and I are playing a game and we have an argument about the rules, we have to work it out. Or the game ends.
Right.
We learn to negotiate. We learn to compromise. We learn that other people see the world differently. We build resilience.
But if a parent or a teacher is always hovering,
Then we just appeal to the authority.
yeah,
Mom, he's cheating. We don't learn how to deal with friction ourselves. So when these kids get to college and hear an idea they don't like, they don't know how to argue against it. They just know how to call the teacher, the dean of students, the bias response team to make the bad man with the bad idea go away.
it's a tragedy of lost resilience.
It really is.
And this brings us to the so what section, because you might be listening to this and thinking, okay, so college campuses are annoying. I get it. Who cares? I don't live on a campus. But the sources are screaming that this doesn't stay on campus. It bleeds out into everything.
It absolutely bleeds out. And the most alarming area, for me, is the hard sciences and medicine. Lawrence Krauss gives these just jaw-dropping examples of ideology entering physics.
The whiteboards thing, I honestly thought that was a joke from the internet when I first saw it.
It sounds like a parody, but it was a real academic paper arguing that the use of whiteboards in physics classrooms is a tool of white supremacy and hegemonic power.
Because why? I don't even understand the logic.
The argument was that it represents a certain style of linear thinking and a written culture that the authors deemed oppressive to other ways of knowing.
Wow.
Now, you can laugh at that, but Krauss points out that this ideology is affecting funding. Scientists are now having to write diversity, equity, and inclusion statements to get money from the government to study black holes. Your commitment to the ideology is becoming a prerequisite for doing basic science.
And then there's the case of Elizabeth Weiss and the skeletal remains. This is where indigenous knowledge clashes directly with scientific inquiry.
This is a profound conflict. Elizabeth Weiss is an anthropologist. She studies human remains to understand our history, the evolution of diseases, migration patterns.
Right, science.
But there is a growing movement, which is now being mandated by new federal guidelines and university policies, to defer to indigenous knowledge.
Which often means religious beliefs or oral traditions.
Correct. Many tribes believe that the ancestors should not be disturbed or that they have spiritual connections to the land that override archaeological evidence. Weiss was blocked from studying skeletal collections because the oral tradition of a tribe, essentially their religious belief, was given higher status than the scientific need to study the bones.
Krauss calls this a return to the Dark Ages.
It is. I mean, his argument is that if you allow religious revelation, whether it's Christian, indigenous, or any other kind, to trump empirical evidence, you are no longer doing science. You are respecting taboo. And taboos, by their very nature, stop the growth of knowledge.
And then we get to medicine. This is where it gets truly life and death.
This is the scariest part. We have sources discussing the new editorial guidelines in top journals like Nature. They have introduced guidance suggesting that research can be rejected if it harms the dignity of a group.
But dignity is completely subjective, and harm is now being defined as anything that contradicts our preferred narrative.
Exactly. The expert speculation in our notes is chilling. Imagine you are studying a disease that disproportionately affects a certain racial group, or you are studying behavioral patterns that lead to poor health outcomes. If your findings are considered stigmatizing, if they make the group look bad, the journal might reject the paper, not because it's wrong, but because it's inconvenient.
So we don't find out the truth. And if we don't know the truth, we can't cure the disease. People die because we were afraid of hurting their feelings.
There's a quote in the source material from a discussion on men's health, which is a perfect example of this. The speaker notes that the life expectancy gap between men and women is massive. Men die years earlier than women on average. And the speaker quotes a professor, Randolph Ness, who calculated that equalizing that health outcome gap would do more good than curing cancer.
That's a huge claim.
It's an enormous claim. But the speaker notes that there is almost no funding, no political will to address men's health as a crisis. Why?
Let me guess. Because men are viewed as the oppressor class in the current ideology.
Exactly. The narrative men are privileged overrides the data men are dying younger. The narrative is more important than the bodies.
That is the cost. That is the body count of ideology.
It is, and it creates what our sources call a death of nuance. We end up in this world of tribalism. Haidt talks about how the left and right has sacralized different things. The left has sacralized race, gender, and the concept of the victim. The right has sacralized the nation and the flag.
And you can't compromise on sacred values. You can't meet in the middle.
You can't. If I challenge your tax policy, we can have a debate. If I challenge your God, or your political substitute for God, you declare holy war. And that is where we are. We're in a religious war, but the religions are political.
So, what does this all mean? Let's try to bring this home. We've painted a pretty bleak picture here. Science is being compromised, institutions are being captured, and we're raising a generation that is terrified of words.
It is bleak, but identifying the problem is always the first step. The synthesis here is that ideology serves as a blinder. When we prioritize a victimhood narrative or safety over truth, we corrupt the very tools we need to survive and solve problems.
We corrupt science.
We corrupt science and we fragility the human spirit.
We are making ourselves weaker and stupider on purpose.
Effectively, yes, but there was a path forward. The sources point to the need for what's called institutionalized disconfirmation.
Which means, in plain English,
It means we need to build systems that force us to be challenged. We need viewpoint diversity. If you are in a room where everyone agrees with you on everything important, you are probably wrong, or at the very least, you are missing half the picture.
so you need to actively seek out disagreement.
You need to hire people who disagree with you. You need to protect the contrarian, not because they are nice or polite, but because they are useful. They are your immune system. They check your biases.
We need to return to merit and evidence as the North Stars.
Yes,
Yeah.
we have to care more about what is true than who is saying it or how it makes us feel.
It reminds me of that line about the coin toss you used earlier. You have to look at the coin, even if it's not the side you wanted to see.
Precisely. And I want to leave the listener with a thought that comes directly out of that drama triangle analysis. It's a provocative question, but I think it's the most important one.
Let's hear it.
If we continue to suppress inconvenient truths to protect people's feelings, if we continue to tell certain groups that they are permanent victims who cannot succeed without a rescuer like us to save them, are we actually helping them? Or are we just keeping them in a permanent state of dependency? Are we preventing the very solutions that could actually lift them up, just so we can feel good about ourselves, just so we can feel like the good guys for protecting them?
Are we the rescuers, or are we actually the jailers?
That is the question.
That is a heavy one to chew on. We're going to wrap it up there. This has been a deep dive into the friction between truth and ideology. As always, thank you for listening. Stay curious, and maybe go find someone who disagrees with you today and just listen. We'll see you next time.